Okay, so this is the Bible study for Exodus chapter 14, verses 15 through 31. And the text says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide the waters so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front of and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to the one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so that they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Then the Lord said, Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. All right. So this is a pretty significant text and kind of a continuation of what we talked about last week, but kind of a completion of it. So remember that you can download PDF copies of our Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us. And the questions for this Bible study, question number 1 says, what did we talk about last week in chapters 13 and 14? A, all I know is that we are finally done with the plagues. True. B, God led Israel in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. True. C, God never left his place in front of Israel, which is kind of a encouraging statement about God's constant presence, and that's true. D, Pharaoh changed his mind again and pursued Israel. True. E, when Pharaoh approached the Israelites, were afraid and complained against Moses. True. F, Moses called on the people to stand firm and watch the deliverance God brings. He told them what they would see and how God would be with them. And that's true. And that's kind of how we ended the text last week. Number 2, what did God say to Moses in 14:15? It says, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. So Moses, according to the text, was telling the Israelites who cried out to God, but also complained against Moses. So it wasn't sort of a pure crying out to God, but more of a whining, complaining fit that involved prayer too, I guess. But apparently Moses had been involved with it. But, Moses, perhaps he had cried out to God on their behalf, and then he had brought back that answer. But God's real answer was, why are you crying out? Keep going. I haven't told you to stop. Keep going. Stop praying. I've got this taken care of. Instead, continue on, keep moving. And so I would say this, it might be that, and God doesn't say specifically stop praying. I just want to be clear, but at the same time, I do think that sometimes the I, stop praying is probably not the right way to say it, but stop only praying and do what I've told you to do is, it may be the only time God ever says something that it is akin to quit praying and do something. Quit praying and do what I told you to do. Why are you crying out to me? Why are you complaining? Why are you asking for help when I've already provided the help? All you have to do is move the way I've told you to move. I'm leading you. And I would say that sometimes in our life, the same thing happens. Number 3 says, do you think God ever says things like this to us? I think absolutely. When God has already led us, when God has already told us where to go, and we're going back to him asking, when are you going to deliver us? How are you going to help us? We need help. And he says, shut up and do what I've told you. Keep moving. Don't stop. The deliverance is already on its way, but it doesn't come unless you continue moving forward. And so I do think God says things like this to us. I don't think we're accustomed to hearing it. I think we have a tendency to sort of in our prayers whine and complain and not obey. And sometimes God is trying to tell us, but we're still sitting there asking for the help that God's already given. He's already provided it. All we have to do is go and take hold of it. And number 4 says, what does God tell Moses in 14, 16, and 17? He says, raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide the water so that the Israelites can go through on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will gain glory. So he tells Moses, I'm going to part the sea. I'm going to go do this, raise up your hands, hold up your staff, and I will part the sea so you can go through on dry ground. But he also says, and they're going to follow you. And that's not necessarily encouraging, perhaps. Second part, what does God say in 14:17 he will do to the Egyptians? He's going to harden their hearts so that they will follow him. Why does God say, according to 14:18, that he's going to do this? He's going to do it because he's going to gain glory from it. So when he delivers Israel, in other words, them going in and pursuing Israel, the Egyptians pursuing Israel, is the way that God plans to deliver Israel. Now, for most of us, we'd rather Egypt turn back, and that's the way we want to be delivered. But God says, I'm going to have them follow you. That's how I'm going to deliver you. And that's not how we usually think he should do it or think he's going to do it. We don't necessarily like that plan. But in the end, just like what we were talking about before, his deliverance is complete because he does it this way. Whereas those Egyptians, if they had just returned and not pursued, then it's always possible they could have come out against them again. Number 5, what happened in 14, 19, and 20? Wait, was it God or the angel of God that was traveling in front of Israel? I don't remember hearing anything about the angel before. So it says in this text that the angel of God who was traveling in front of Israel's army withdrew and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud also moved from in front of them and stood behind them. So the answer is the angel and God in the pillar of cloud and pillar of fire both moved behind them, and apparently both were following them. But yes, this is the first we've heard of that. We didn't hear about that in the first few verses when we were hearing about the pillar. B, the angel in the cloud moved behind Israel or remained between Israel and Egypt. When I first read it, I thought, wait, was it the angel that was in the pillar of cloud and fire? I thought that was God himself. But the answer is no, it doesn't tell us that the angel was in the pillar. The angel was going before them also with the pillar. So now let me just say this. Um, in scripture, angels are messenger spirits doing the work and the will of God. And so there's a lot of times where, at least in modern times, we have a tendency to attribute a lot to angels. And then we have a question like this that we're like, so wait, did God do that or did the angel? And in particularly in New Mexican culture, I've noticed a lot being attributed to the angels, which really should be attributed to God. My angel was watching over me. There's a lot of things like that that are said, and it's really God watching over us. And anything that an angel does, the angel does on behalf of God. So an angel doesn't do anything on its own. An angel does the will of God. They are messenger or worker spirits that do the will of God. Um, why does God say, according to 14:18? No, that's the wrong question. C, the cloud brought darkness to one side and light to the other, and the two sides never went near each other all night long. So this was God's way of protecting Israel from the Egyptians, so that he had time to divide the waters and put enough space in between them that they could get out of the water while or off to the dry ground in between the water, if you will, while the Egyptians were just getting into that area so they could be washed away. Number 6, what happened in 14:21 through 31? A, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided. That's true. B, the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That's true. C, the Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. That's true. During the last watch of the Lord through the Egyptian army, it's the wrong kind of through that's typed there. I know that. Through the Egyptian army into confusion. That's true. E, the Egyptians had trouble and said, let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. They recognized it. That's true. F, the Lord told Moses to stretch out his hand, it should be hand, not and, over the sea. And at daybreak, the sea, not say, this is English, went back into its place. That's true. G, the Egyptians were swept into the sea, not one of them survived. That's true. H, the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. Yes. I, when the Israelites saw the mighty hand, mighty, not might, hand of the Lord, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. So this is a story of what happened with a lot of typos. And I appreciate that when God did all this, the people feared the Lord and they put trust in Moses, his servant. So we recognize that when the Israelites thought that Moses had led them out to the slaughter, they were complaining against him. Now they recognize that God did all this. They put their trust in God, but they also recognize Moses as God's servant, who had done the will of God and been the instrument through which God worked. And so they put their trust in Moses also. Number 7, did God do what he said he was going to do? Yes or no? Yes, he obviously did. And that's why we kind of skipped through the whole story, or kind of A through I, summarize the whole story in this last question. But the real point is that all of that is God's doing what he said he was going to do. This is how he accomplished what he had promised. And that's really the important point of this. Why do you think the Israelites complained against Moses in last week's text? Because they didn't think God was going to do what he said he was going to do. And they didn't trust Moses. So they had no faith in God or in Moses. But all of a sudden now they do. Do we do the same thing? Yes, no, explain. Obviously, I think we do. I see it all the time, and I'd love to say that's for the heathens and the bad Christians, but honestly, I'm tempted, and I don't know where the line is crossed, where we lack faith at a level of sinfulness, and where the line is, we're still on the right side of the line where our faith is weak, and but I echo the man that said, "If you can," to Jesus, and he said, "If you can, anything's possible for those who believe." And the man says, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief," because he said, "I do believe, but yeah, I get it. What I just said exhibits unbelief." And help me not to be so without faith. And I think we need that sort of prayer too. Do we trust in God when we see what he can do? Do we put our trust in him and in Moses, his servant, if you will, when we see? I think the answer is for a short time, temporarily at least, until we hit the next um, obstacle, which is what the last part of the question is alluding to, where it says, "Do you think this is a happily ever after end to this story?" Well, it'd be nice if it was, but um, the Israelites struggle to trust in God and in Moses, his servant, again when they hit the next obstacle. And there's a consistent pattern. How do we escape this pattern? How do we um, pray that prayer, "Help me overcome my unbelief," and then trust him enough to trust, to believe in him the next time? And that's where we need to get to.